Okay. Hi, everyone. We'll get started now. Should stop seeing the poll results. So let's see, just keep admitting folks through the waiting room. Hi, everyone. My name is Hallie Perlick. I'll be the technical manager for this session, chaired by Alexander Kalambira. Thank you for taking part in this ANH Academy Week, and we look forward to a very robust and interactive session today. A few quick reminders that everything you might need to access for the conference is available on our website at anh-academy.org/ANH2020. Thank you for filling out this brief poll. As I mentioned, it looks like a few of us have been able to watch the animations and pre-recorded videos. So that's great. It allows us to get right to the interactive part of this discussion. Before Alexander takes the conversation forward, I just have a few technical announcements to ensure that our experience is as smooth and interactive as possible. First, you will have been notified that this session is being recorded and it will be posted on the ANH Academy website following the conference. Second, all of the participants have been muted, but please use the chat box to introduce yourselves using, let us know your name, where you're joining, and the organization that you work with. You can access the chat box by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We also encourage you to share your webcam video during this session, but if you prefer not to, you could also add a profile picture so we can see your face. When your video is off, you can do this by right-clicking on your name in the Zoom window and clicking Add Profile Photo. Later in the session, we'll open up for a Q&A. If you have questions, we invite you to share them in the chat box throughout the session, and we'll do our best to raise them during the Q&A. If we have some time, we'll have participants raise their hands so we can ask you to ask your question aloud. And last, if at any point you experience any technical issues, please check your audio settings and your internet connection. You can always try to reconnect to the session using the same link that you used to get here today. If you have a technical question, you can send me a private message using the chat box. Thanks so much, and over to you, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Hallie, and we welcome all the participants who have joined in this meeting this afternoon, and also to our esteemed speakers, Jody, Kenny Karaoke, Limbanazo, Limbanazo, you're right there, I've seen you, and also Scott Dreamy from Stellenbosch. So Jody is from the Institute of Development Studies and World Vegetable Center. Kenny Karaoke is from SOAS University of London, and Limbanazo Matandika is from Malawi College of Medicine, and Scott Dreamy from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. You recall that this meeting, this conference, Academy Week, was supposed to be held in Malawi, and so we are privileged that even in the context of COVID-19, we can have a virtual conference taking place. And we have right now 31 people attending, and you're most welcome. My name is Alexander from the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. I am based at right in Lilongwe, which is the capital city of Malawi, and I'm in the Department of Human Nutrition and Health. I chair the Department of Human Nutrition and Health. So I'm your session chair, and thank you very much to all technical people behind the scene who are helping us to take care of all the participants. We are going to proceed to introduce our speakers. We have four. Jody Harris. Jody, Jody is here. Thank you very much. Jody, most welcome. Jody is from the Institute of Development Studies and World Vegetable Center. Would you say hi to people, Jody?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Alexander. It's really nice to be here.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Let's make sure that Kenny Karaoke is here. Ken?
Yes, I'm here as well. And yeah, live and direct.
Perfect. Limbanazo Matandika from College of Medicine, University of Malawi. I saw Limbanazo. Hello, Limbanazo.
Hi, Alexander. Alexander?
Oh, okay. So yeah, so we can hear you. The quality is not too great. I'm not sure whether you're too far away from your mic, but all the same, thank you very much and most welcome. And we also have Scott Dreamy from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Scott, would you please say good afternoon to participants?
Good afternoon, participants. Hi, Alex. Very nice to see you all.
Thank you. So you're most welcome. We have everyone in place now, and we are ready to go. And so many of you have attended the opening session. Unfortunately, I was away. I had to travel very quickly back to attend this meeting because of other issues that came up. So I wasn't able to do that, but we'll try. We have pretty much an hour from now of interaction and short presentations and then your questions, which will be posted onto a Google Drive, and then we'll be able to read out those questions. We will begin with Jode, and just very few of us have watched the video from the stats that were collected from the survey. I would like to invite Jode. This session is about political and economic dynamics of nutrition and health, what's happening out there in terms of the political environment that allows players in nutrition to implement, to dialogue and to have interventions going, as well as the economic environment that is there, what things are changing, how are they changing, and different experiences from different parts of the world. And the organizers have carefully put together the four so that we hear perspectives from different countries, and then we can interact based on the issues that they share with us. Because we are already running behind schedule a little bit, and so I'd like to invite Jode Harris. Jode, would you like to come in and make your brief presentation, Jode?
Thanks, Alexander. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So let me know if this works. So hopefully everyone can see my slides. Is that right, Alexander?
I can see it. I trust everyone can. Yeah. So please go ahead.
Great. So we're in a session on political and economic dynamics. My talk is neither political nor economic, but I'm talking about inequity, which cuts across both. So I don't have much time, so I am going to have to assume that people either have or will watch the 7-minute video. I'm just going to elaborate on a couple of points. So if you remember, if you have seen it, this is a scoping review of agriculture, nutrition and health research. And we're looking at how it treats aspects of equity based on this new framework for understanding inequity and inequality at different levels for nutrition. So this figure is the one I'm going to focus on because it really brings the scoping review together. So it's a heat map that shows the density of research that we found in this review, covering the different equity topics at the bottom, with the different ANH, agriculture, nutrition and health topics around the top. So the equity topics at the bottom there include a set of factors that describe people's social position and factors by which they might be marginalized from accessing good nutrition. And also we looked at how those interact. Also a set of factors looking at people's economic and social capital, things like financial resources, but also things like education. And then also a set of factors looking at the underlying social norms and values that shape who is marginalized in the first place. So what this shows, for instance, this whole heat map, is that within agriculture, a majority of papers focus on primary production, sort of on-farm production. These are the blue part to the left. And of these, the main areas of equity focus for these papers were capital and resources, gender and poverty. Those were the top three. Within nutrition, the purple there, a majority of papers looked at undernutrition or sometimes diets. And for both of those, most papers assess, again, capital and resources, followed by poverty and gender. And for undernutrition, but not diets, quite a lot look at structural determinants as well. And then lastly, within the clinical and occupational health over there in yellow, again, capital and resources is most assessed, followed by gender and geography. So we're seeing a similar focus in terms of the top equity issues that are focused on, and also the issues that are much more marginalized and not focused on. So you can explore that more in the paper, which is out soon. And I'll just finish in terms of next steps. So the review is just a first step really in identifying relevant literature and starting to understand the gaps and limitations in our field of ANH, in assessing and understanding and acting on inequity. So further work can now be done by taking this literature that we found and looking more in depth at particular aspects that interest different research groups in order that some of these knowledge gaps can be filled. So as well as publishing these findings as a paper, we're also going to make available to the community the listing of papers that we found, as well as how they mapped to the different equity areas we were looking at, which is what this Excel file shows that you can see on screen. And we'll also share a reference list that others can follow up and prioritize those research gaps. So really it's over to everyone else now to incorporate equity into their research. I'll leave it there, but I'll be very happy to talk more about this in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Jode. That's quite brief to the point. We have questions waiting for you. We'll get to there in a moment. So we'll run through all the presenters. So, and then at the end, we will get to the questions so that you may respond. Kenny, you are here, and I would like to invite you from SOAS University of London to also make a brief of what your presentation, your video is about. Kenny?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me try share this screen of mine. Hopefully it'll work. You guys can see that?
Yes, we can see it. Would you just put it in presentation mode?
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity, the chair and the rest of you for all coming through, and the technical staff. I know I only have 3 minutes, so I shall be as concise as Jody, hopefully. Basically, looking at the political economy of the Kenyan agricultural sector, and this was basically under the lens of decentralization. Essentially, I argue and I contend that Kenya has a thoroughgoing decentralization process, unprecedented in the SSA region, beyond Ghana, beyond Uganda, that were in its 90s considered the darlings of decentralization. And Kenya readdresses this whole issue of what is exactly, when it comes to decentralization, what benefits can you actually derive from it? You would find that theoretical literature, and I couldn't actually present the whole debate about all the benefits of decentralization, but some of the decentralization outcomes that are basically meant to be positive are the fact that you're meant to find development and service delivery, and that's what I really focus on when it comes to agriculture. Kenya's decentralization process came out of, shall I say, a spell of violence in 2007, 2008. From that, a new constitutional process was basically derived, and unlike in other countries, you find this wonderful moment where actually most of the powerful groups in the nation, intermediate groups, are in the same room, and they actually negotiate a process that says, here's how we're going to equitably redistribute rents and power throughout our society. And unlike in Museveni's country or in Rawlings' time, it isn't a party state. It's actually, you have actually actors all around the room. So what happens is, within this process, you actually get something that no one actually wins, but there is some kind of modicum of acceptance of what it is. Now, within that, agriculture gets devolved. Now, this is where we get into where we are right now this week. What happens with agriculture in the Kenyan context is that now we devolve agriculture and we put in new actors. So that's basically the opportunity to find out, does decentralization actually merit some kind of change when you have political, fiscal, and administrative decentralization? Do you actually begin to see or derive some of the benefits of decentralization? So the research was conducted in 4 counties within Kenya that I think if you watch the video, you'll have seen me speed through it because it's only 7 minutes. But the research basically found that, unfortunately, decentralization, there is a debate on the actual benefits because of the fact that we don't actually take into account how informal institutions change theoretical benefits within that context, especially within a clientelist political settlement, where there are patron-client relationships. And so when you apply political settlement theory, and that really just focuses on, you know, power between groups and how that perpetuates itself over time, you can begin to really look at actual outcomes within, shall I say, the agricultural sector, and begin to ask questions that are more telling. Do farmers actually have collective action? Do they actually have power? What is their power? Do they vote as a bloc? You'll find very quickly that that's not the case. So when we begin to look at the benefits of decentralization in this context, and in agriculture in Kenya, post-2010, when we actually had this new constitution rolled through, you begin to get something that looks like the diagram on the right-hand side, where there were these new vertical checks and balances. You do find that, yes, there was actual thoroughgoing decentralization. However, yeah, I hope it's clear enough, from 2003 to 2013, when the post-era, you find that actually, because counties actually have the right to control agriculture, there's a new form of centralization within subunits, and now governors, who are basically the apex operating political actor within those units, actually have their own interests. You find very quickly, there is public expenditure that leans more towards development rather than, shall I say, facilitation or operations. You find that governors have different, shall I say, politically minded ways about going about agriculture, but there are also benefits. I can't talk about them all. Hopefully we'll talk about them in discussion. But it really, this diagram really demonstrates how rents and rent seeking shifted to subnational units effectively, but the permeation wasn't, shall I say, effective service delivery because better response. What you find is, it is something that's a bit more skewed and a bit more based in reality, the reality of power on the ground and the reality of the institutions that actually exist. So I think I'll leave it at that because, yeah, I only had 3 minutes. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken, for racing us through that. We have an idea of what's happening in Kenya with decentralization and how that's playing out. Very quickly, again, there'll be questions for you, Ken, so you stay right there. Limbanazo, I invite you to also very briefly, 3 minutes, to give us a recap of what your work is about. Limbanazo? Limbanazo, your mic is still muted. Okay, there you are.
Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah, the show is yours. Please go ahead, Limbanazo.
Thank you so much. Everyone from Limbanazo and a PhD student registered with the University of Houston. And this afternoon, I'm very privileged to present an interesting approach that we are calling the real-time research ethics approach. This will be discussing about mindfulness in agriculture, nutrition, and research. And I start, this may be a new
Limbanazo, hello, Limbanazo. So I don't know if the technical colleagues in the UK, we can't hear her. She's kind of breaking. Is that a problem on her side, or this is something you can fix right away?
It appears that she has a poor connection.
It's a poor connection on her side. Okay, Limbanazo, we don't have a great audio coming out of the College of Medicine, wherever you are, but please go ahead. We've seen the video and we'll try to connect where it's breaking. We'll think of what you wanted to say. Please go ahead, proceed.
Or maybe you can take the other presenter while I'm sorting out the interconnection.
Perhaps let's try that if you can get your connection sorted out. So sorry everyone about that, but we need to a good audio. So Scott Dremy from Stellenbosch University, South Africa, would I invite you to give a brief again of your presentation while Limbanazo is fixing her connection.
I can do that. I hope you can see my screen, if you can just let me know. Just at the outset, just to acknowledge Mara van den Bol and Lara Kasu, We're both in the
so
audience.
I can't see your screen. I still have Limbanazo's screen. Yes, there we go now. Thank you. You may proceed.
So we're very much looking at the political economy of nutrition in South Africa, and with the intention of understanding 25 years of policy making and looking to the future in terms of food system transformation. I'm not going to go into any detail around our methods that was in our presentation and in the slides, but just to, at front, just to acknowledge that we've been guided by the Enabling Environment Framework put forward by Stuart Gillespie et al. In 2013. So very much in terms of how issues have been framed, communicated, how decisions are articulated from Pretoria, Shwani, and then disseminated downwards to the grassroots where the impact with people most effective is made. So just in terms of our preliminary results, there have been extraordinary changes in 25 years since apartheid. The brutality of the previous regime has been completely turned on its head post-Mandela. And there has been, without doubt, a comprehensive response to address these multiple forms of malnutrition. And we've reviewed any number of extraordinary policies. The key argument is that these interventions have the potential for benefit, that are not yet, in fact, making the changes that we anticipate them to have been made, or which have been articulated in the policies. The challenges that have hindered policy are inadequate implementation. So a lot to do with capacity, to do with training, to do with understanding issues, a lack of complementary interventions. So often we have programs operating in isolation and silos. Sometimes one could argue you could place them in the same area and they may even cancel each other out. Questions of coordination and alignment, which is something that emerges throughout the stories of challenge research in many countries, and indeed questions about scarce fiscal resources. So what gets paid for gets done. The finding here is that the policy frameworks, although well-intended, remain very far from the real lives of many South Africans. And we focus particularly on this issue of incoherence, and essentially decisions that maybe are made by the Department of Trade and Industry in order to bring in direct investment contradicts an argument about healthy diets or what food people should be eating. And certainly you would see an agricultural minister perhaps making a decision about a drive in a particular place that then contradicts what the health department wants to do. So these are important also to recognize that behind this is real politics, behind policy making, and that policy as a panacea for dealing with the different issues of malnutrition have to be understood in terms of very many trade-offs that happen within political parties that govern a country. So in terms of our conclusions, we feel that much of what has emerged is specific to South Africa, certainly, but it has relevance for the broader continent, and that there are important insights to understand the complexity of food systems. It's double duty interventions, which is becoming in focus. There's opportunities to understand what those entry points are and to, in fact, engage with those. And a holistic food system approach with, at the core, food environment conceptualization is something that we're taking very seriously. Our next stage is to go into the field in terms of working with provincial officials. And so over the next 6 months, COVID-19 permitting, through a virtual platform, we'll be interacting with a number of provincial officials in terms of understanding the challenges they face. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Scott, for taking us to South Africa to see the post-apartheid perspective of how policies are driving an enabling environment for agriculture, health, and nutrition. Very quickly, Limbanazo, are you back there, or can you try to say something? Let's hear how the quality of your connection, Limbanazo. Limbanazo, I can see you are there, but your mic is muted. Okay, perhaps Limbanazo will give her a little more time to get connected. Oh yes, please go ahead, Limbanazo.
Thank you so much, Alexander, for your patience while I was sorting out my internet issues.
You
Allow
sound
me to
better
share.
now, so please go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Can you allow me to share the screen now?
Hali, would you permit her? Okay, you're working on that. Sure, great.
It should be all set now. You should be able to share your screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, your screen is here. Just put it in presentation mode. Great, thank you. Please go ahead, Limbanazo.
Thank you so much. My name is Limbanazo Majandika, a registered PhD student at the University of Malawi College of Medicine. And this afternoon, I'll be presenting about an approach that we are calling a real-time research ethics approach that discusses the ethical mindfulness in agriculture, nutrition, and health research. And we take this from a case study from a trial that was conducted in Malawi. And I will briefly talk more about the trial in the coming slides. Why do we need to identify and manage ethical aspects of agriculture, nutrition, and health research? There's been notable investments in large partner research programs in the agriculture, nutrition, and health nexus. And a good example is the current geonutrition project that is being implemented by the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources in collaboration with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and also the University of Nottingham. And recently, there's been a shift in agriculture research that there is involvement of human participants. And also, nutrition and agriculture research are undergoing research ethics approval. However, using already existing social science procedures. However, with these new research programs, human research participants are increasingly being involved in a more diverse and complex ways that was not commonplace in agriculture. And the main question is now, why do we need to involve to discuss about human participation in agriculture and nutrition research? So I'll base mainly my discussion on a case study on a trial that was conducted in Malawi. And the trial is called the Addressing Hidden Hunger with an Agronomy Trial. So the main question that this trial wanted to answer was to see if selenium deficiency in Malawi could be alleviated through the consumption of agro-bio-fortified maize flour. So the AHA trial, bio-fortified maize flour enriched with the selenium, and the maize flour was distributed to a community in rural Malawi. However, the main interesting features that we'll discuss about this trial, the first one is that it was conducted in a community, and it was also a randomized controlled trial. And people who were enrolled in this research were women and school-going children that we call minors in research. And another interesting feature are some of the activities that were embedded in the study as some of the study procedures. So this included blood withdrawals, and these happened within the communities and at baseline and at endline. And another interesting feature about this case study is the issue of compliance and consumption. So the study participants were supposed to consume the flour for a period of 12 weeks. However, what I would be interested to discuss is looking at the research environment that this trial was being conducted. So just to discuss briefly some of the experiences that the research participants were encountering in the community is to look at the myths and the conceptions about the overall trial. And also to highlight that in Malawi, we do have low literacy levels. This entails that there was little knowledge about research projects in the community. and also looking at different beliefs about blood within the communities, and to look that this study was being conducted right away in the communities, away where we know that a lot of blood withdrawals for medical or for other diagnostic purposes are done in clinical settings, but in this instance, blood withdrawal was being done within the communities. So this just highlights the involvement that this trial was being implemented. But our main focus would be to talk about the real-time research ethics approach, and this is the research that we took. So in a nutshell, the real-time research ethics approach.
So Limbanazo, you'll be, if you can get towards conclusion, because you're way above, beyond your time allocation, please proceed to conclude. Thanks.
Thank you. I will discuss about the main features of the real-time research ethics approach, and then begin to answer some of the question or some of the emergent themes that allowed us to offset the research environment or some of the challenges that we have discussed about the research environment challenges. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So thank you to all the three presenters, beginning with Jody Harris, Ken Karaoke, Limbanazo Matandika, as well as Scott Dreamy. And what we're going to do is we'll proceed with a Q&A. There are already questions that were posted much earlier, and everyone has access to those questions. What I would like to do is, Limbanazo, because we had challenges with your connection, I don't know how stable it is, but I would like to begin with you. If you may take note of the questions that are in the that were posted. You have two questions so far that are there, and I would like you to pull out the first question to respond to it in row number 9. I think this approach is incredibly important and speaks to the importance of equitable partnership in ANH research, not just between organizations, but between researchers and participants. I wonder if this approach could have health benefits of its own, for example, improving mental well-being of participants. How should we capture those and separate them from the effects of that trial? Limbanazo, would you like to make an attempt to respond to that specific question?
Thank you so much, Alexander, and thank you so much for that interesting question. First of all, I would start to respond about the mental issue. So for us, the real-time research ethics approach allowed the bioethics team, because the real-time allows the embedding of the bioethicist in line with the team that is implementing the study. So in this case, the bioethics team or the real-time research ethics approach allowed us to explore participants' experiences. And this, as we are calling it, study participants had negative and positive experiences. So by being available within the communities to discuss negative and positive experiences with our study participants allowed us to enhance some of the responsibilities or obligation of study participants per se. So as I discussed about the main features of the trial, so the trial wanted the study participants to consume the flower for 12 weeks. But for example, if study participants are hearing, for example, one of the myths might be, if you eat the flower, then men will have fertility issues. Our presence within the communities allowed us to provide relevant information or offset some of the myths that allowed to elevate fear from the study participants in order to comply or take their obligations of consuming the flower within the study period. And also at the same time, I would say that this study will only report about this approach. And we have another study that will report the experiences of the study participants and how the real-time research ethics approach allowed or enhanced study participants' positive experiences within the study. So we may not be able to report the overall experiences of the study participants. This will be reported in another paper.
Okay, thank you. Please, if you later on after they have responded to these questions that we have, we don't have too many questions, and I guess they'll make an attempt on all the questions. Please raise your hand later on if you have a question that you'd like maybe to simply have a follow-up on any of the responses. Please take note of the second question, Limbanazo. How would you respond to that second question for you?
Do you mind reading the question?
Oh, okay, sorry. So the question reads, moving forward, how would you convince other ANH trials to incorporate your real-time research ethics approach? Limbanazo?
I would encourage ANH researchers to incorporate the real-time research ethics approach for two reasons. The first reason is because we have seen a shift in agriculture, nutrition, and health research, that you are now incorporating human participants or human subjects. This therefore entails that the environment that the research projects have to be conducted have also to take into consideration mechanisms that will provide and promote the safety and the well-being of human subjects that will be participating in research. And the second main important consideration that researchers have to take into consideration is that the real-time research ethics approach provides a mechanism where researchers could discuss some of the challenging issues that they met during the implementation of research projects. So for example, I would provide that in settings like in low middle income countries where research with human subjects is increasing. However, you find there a lot of myths and misconception about research. There is little knowledge about research projects. However, researchers also want to be able to answer their research questions with credible data and with credible outcomes. So involvement of human subjects will ensure that researchers are able to understand various experiences that they emerge within the conduct of the study that may provide a barrier or that may have an effect or they may have an impact on the validity or on the outcome of the research findings. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that attempt. Obviously, there'll be follow-up questions later on, so please stay right there. I'll go to Jody. You were the first presenter, and there are several questions, Jody, as you have noted, which you would have to respond to. I would like you to pay attention to the second question. What would you recommend for ANH researchers who want to incorporate equity considerations in their work? Jody?
Thank you, Alexander. Yeah, and I think actually there's also another question that says, would we need more sort of qualitative research to answer the types of questions about why these inequalities exist in the first place? And I think I can speak to both of those at once. So in terms of what we found, in terms of sort of disciplinary and methodological approaches of these papers that we found in the review, we had a real mix, as you can imagine. So we had a lot of epidemiology papers and a lot of economics papers. And obviously those were, you know, quantitative methods of different types. We also had quite a lot of papers that were using what we've categorized as sort of development studies, anthropological type approaches. And those will be, you know, completely different types of papers, but still looking at aspects of equity. So that speaks to sort of methodological divide in the ANH world that we know is there. Some people are going to be comfortable in their research disaggregating data, quantitative data, by some of those different aspects of marginalization. So we very often do it by poverty, by gender. I would push the community to go beyond those two aspects of marginalization. What about caste? What about ethnicity? What about religion? What about sexuality? What is it in different contexts that is marginalizing different groups? and try to disaggregate data, collect data on that basis in terms of the context that you're looking at. So if you're a quantitative researcher, I would push you to go that far, and also to go as far as looking at how some of those things interact. If you've got a younger woman of an ethnic minority group, how does that age, gender and ethnicity sort of interact to shape her life chances? So that's if you're a sort of quantitative researcher. If you're more of a qualitative researcher, and I realize these are huge generalizations, maybe you want to go a bit deeper to understand how some of those structural, social and political determinants interact with food and agriculture systems to create those marginalizations in the first place. So perhaps you'll want to look at some of those things that are further to the left-hand side of that framework that I showed you, that's available in the Global Nutrition Report for everybody to look at, on the social and political determinants of inequity in nutrition. So yes, there's lots more to do, but it can be done from all kinds of different angles. And I would always advocate a sort of live and let live approach to method and epistemology. So, and groups like the ANH Academy are fantastic for cross-fertilizing ideas among those different groups of researchers, and that's what makes for the richest contribution. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So Jodie, while you're there, another question just came in row number 10. If you may take note of that, how would you respond to that question?
How row 10 is about trials.
Row 10, oh, I have it as
row
10.
14 from Mara.
Yes, from Mara, that's right, yes.
Okay, so Mara is a bit surprised at the lack of focus on equity within this research. I think it's because we work with great groups that do look at equity. But is there a plan to really push that agenda, or share or make accessible these findings with the ANH network? So absolutely, the very last slide that I shared just now was a screenshot of an Excel file, which is going to be shared with anyone who wants to see it, in order to share with the community what the gaps are, at least what we found. It doesn't mean that everywhere there isn't research is a key gap, of course. We need, between us as a community, to decide what those key gaps are, and different people will pinpoint different things. But I think some of the gaps that are there are very well shown through the review, and we can decide as a community where we focus. Tanya also just asked what were the most important gaps in study and evidence. In terms of numbers, which was sort of as far as we were able to go in this review, certainly the sort of structural determinants, the social and political reasons why these groups are marginalized in the first place, and what that means for their nutrition through food systems and agriculture, was a big gap. But that doesn't mean that some of these other issues of lack of research on ethnicity, for instance, on caste, on different aspects of marginalization beyond gender and poverty, are also not a gap. So it depends where you're coming from, what type of research you do, as to what gap you're going to want to fill. But I would say, I don't think it's too far to go, that every piece of research that we do should consider equity. Everything from the real sort of political economy studies that we've just seen from a couple of colleagues on this session, they can all look at what the outcomes mean for different groups, and that's essentially the most basic way of looking at equity. And the final question there, and then I'll be quiet, is when will the research paper be published? It's under review in a journal called Nutrition Reviews. We've just had the reviews back, so as soon as we can get to those, I hope in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodie. Obviously, we'll have a few more questions perhaps later on. Let me turn to you, Ken. There are two questions so far in the matrix. Would you like to respond to both of them?
Sure. I think both questions touch on public participation particularly, and how that is a transformative tool, and actually who is represented. I'd first go on to say that one of the things I mentioned earlier is the fact that there are issues with collective action problems when it comes to farmers. Sub-Saharan Africa, if you go to most parts of the developing world, the majority of the population is farmers, or if not, poor people, many found in rural areas. The issue is simply Why is it that you can't find farmer groups coming together to have political power? And now that goes into the issues of access to capital, access to violence, whatever you want to refer to as your scheme of power. Farmers don't have it. In the context of Kenya, sometime in the 80s, we had very powerful farmer groups, but they were a threat to actual political leaders who either co-opted them or watered them down. So when it comes to public participation now in the post-2013 world, where we have a new constitution that comes through, the transition clauses are ended, and we now have decentralized agriculture, you want to ask how within this subnational unit do you actually find people actually having more of a voice, because, we are closer to the actors who we actually elect. The reality is it's perpetuated itself in time and the space that what you find, unfortunately, is that there are groups that coalesce even within subnational units. It is not that these groups didn't exist before, it's just that now they can actually organize differently in a different space. So I'm not saying it's hopeless, don't get me wrong. I'm saying that there's a new dynamic, and when it comes to the actual instruments that ensure public participation in Kenya, I'd say that's why there's hope. The Constitution ensures public participation, even the whole budgeting process that I'm not going to go through, at every point, from essentially from the review to the annual development plan, every aspect should have public participation. When I did the research with focus groups, with national and county actors, they all said the same thing. We have the right stakeholders, the stakeholders come to the meetings. When you check who these stakeholders are, when you go a bit further in, you find out, unfortunately, some of these stakeholders, most of these stakeholders are people who actually who work with farmers, but not necessarily are the farmers. And when it is actual farmers, you might find those farmers have connections, or they're part of a group that's well organized, a good cooperative, or they're farmers that are well connected due to whatever familial, ethnic reason, or maybe some kind of historical reason. It's not the broad base, let us all get all the farmers together. And then even when you talk about public participation, you have to think about the forum of public participation. If you and I were to go to a public participation forum in any of our capitals or any of our towns or cities, and you just walk into a room, an agenda is put up, and the agenda is 1, 2, 3, 4, we have an hour to go through it, how do you begin to even engage with that? So public participation, yes, it exists formally, but the reality is that there are very many hurdles put in place, even at the subnational level, to ensure that only certain actors can actually participate effectively. And so immediately what you do is, from this question, is you find that it is a tool, however, without organization from civil society, or without organization for strong farmer cooperatives, immediately, even if you're a farmer, a smallholder farmer, if you come to a forum, if you're invited, you might find very quickly that you begin to get drowned out with all the information. You don't come in numbers, because you actually find very quickly that it's not something that's actually publicized, even if it's meant to be. And if it is, it might happen at 7 p.m. or it might happen at 7 a.m. You're not too sure when. And so you find that information costs are also very high when it comes to public participation. So the reality is, will it get better? Is there a space in which it can get better? Yes. Are the instruments there that can actually ensure that happens? Yes. But what I talked about, the informal modifications, is that if powerful groups are put in, and this is my final example. I come from a place called Kenya. I love my hometown. I love Nairobi, but I also understand that the formal institutions that govern police in Kenya aren't necessarily translatable to the formal institutions that translate, let's say, in London. You can take a script of paper and say, these are the rules that you should abide by. But the reality is the institutions might not work the same. That's why you can say, ex ante, we're going to give all the rules, we're going to put a court system, police, everything should work. But we find time and again in developing contexts that that's not the case. We have completely different outcomes. And that's the same thing with public participation. It exists. In reality, it can change with time, but it has to be organized. And those organizations, I find, were best found with civil society when it's actually people are informed, this is what they need to do. And when it came down to actual farmer groups that were powerful enough, or at least organized enough to engage that. Is another question?
Ken, yes. There's a question that just came with regard to the Kenya National Cereals and Produce Board. Can you read that question and respond to it real quick, please?
The NCPB. The NCPB is a fantastic place. Let's see, is to be privatized. Okay, the NCPB is, if I were to just go in quickly, it is in 2013, when I talk about this decentralization of agriculture, the NCPB was one of the only state parastatals that was created in the 1980s by Mzee Moi, Daniel Moi, may he rest in peace. And and I didn't talk about this in my presentation, but you find in Kenya that a lot of institutions are also created to transfer rents, and especially when it comes to different commodities. The NCPB is the National Cereal Policy Board. It's responsible for the distribution of most of the subsidies in the nation and seeds. It controls most of the warehouses, and it, time and again, since the 80s, you cannot, if you look at public, if I had the slide, I'll show you. The amount of investment or public expenditure within a national level normally goes through the NCPB. So it's just like Malawi, you had your case of subsidized fertilizers. We have the same thing, and as you know, the effects are questionable. So
Ken, the issue is if it's going to be privatized, will it improve efficiency? What's your yes or no?
No,
it will not.
I don't believe it will improve efficiency, just because the fact that about 2 years ago, we had this project called Galana Kulalo in Kenya. It was meant to be 100,000 acres, or actually 1 million acres under maize. It was, on paper, it sounds perfect. You have irrigated maize that can feed the nation and make us food secure. But the reality is it never went anywhere. For 4 or 5 years, it stalled. The Israelis got tired, they moved, they left, the project fell apart, the billions of shillings that went into it just dried up. And that's because you can't actually remove the groups that control this wealth. There's a reason why the NCPB has prevailed and continues to sustain itself. It's not because, yeah, so I won't go, I'll leave it there.
All right, okay. I think we get a perspective. I think basically you're saying you don't think it will improve efficiency.
Not if it does. Yes.
From Stellenbosch, some 3 questions in the matrix for you. Would you like to make aim and attempt them?
Yeah, so I've had a little bit of time, so I'm going to try and pull the questions together and answer them in one way. And I do appreciate sort of an attention to a lot of the issues of, again, participation, about from whence policy emanates, who decides, these real political economy questions. What is very interesting to note is, in terms of the structures of government in South Africa, we have, as many countries do, an old military remnant in terms of the architecture. So you have a director general and you have various lieutenants that then cascade downwards. And the way the decisions are made is that there is an order that is supposedly then followed through down to the people at the grassroots. The money channels down in a particular way, and then the reporting channels back upwards. And in these silos are carefully constructed, there is very little room for participation. And in South African political history since '94, we have an argument that with a democratic election, the ruling party, or the governing party, which is a better term, represent the people and therefore understand the people. And therefore, that is where the real sort of drive of deciding what happens. A number of policies have been criticized for a lack of participation and engagement, unless there are active financed lobby groups involved. And we understand in the food system where the money sits and where the lobby groups perhaps sit, both in terms of formal organized agriculture, but also food industry. So these are real issues. So I really reflect on that. There was a point about, are there any examples where there has been better kind of policy making in the country? And our intention in terms of the second phase is to go fairly deep in a number of provinces to really understand how provincial officials have understood and translated policy directives in ways that are then appropriate for the places in which they work. So this is a very interesting story. In the Western Cape, there is a program called Nourish to Flourish, which was essentially developed with a lot of consultation with academics, researchers, some groups working in smallholder agriculture. The innovation emerged when they brought on an organization called the Southern Africa Food Lab to develop teams and essentially to set up projects with experimentation to take some of those pillars and to do some interesting things in order to set the process in motion. And that is one of the, I think, most important examples of a participatory process in South Africa. Another, the sugar tax, not grassroots certainly, but groups of academics, activists coming together. They lobbied Treasury. They sideswiped the big sugar industry, obviously, and I would argue officials that perhaps were more inclined towards that tax base. And by lobbying within Treasury, this group over a number of years were able to somehow argue and were successful in getting a sugar tax. So another example of participation. And then there was a last question about how we as a team are going to be thinking about and using the concept of food environments as a more sort of inclusive way of enabling policy to emerge. And this, the reflection that we've been sort of working with is that it's a matter of scale. That in many instances, if you work towards a city or a metro and you bring in the concept of food environments, then opportunities emerge in terms of what the city authorities are able to do in terms of their own regulation, their own planning rights, their own zoning, and how working with those existing instruments with then engaging informal vendors or perhaps those that are dealing with flow of food, something more important and interesting could emerge. And there is a lot of focus now on food environments at a more localized scale in order to enable better translation of policy for changes on the ground. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Scott. There's a question about creation of a new ministry. Have you responded to that?
So I have not responded to that.
Oh, okay. I mean, your quick thoughts about that. They say in the UK they are creating a minister for hunger. Do you think there is a need for a new minister or department? Whether this can bring any change or not? What's your perspective about that?
Absolutely not. In South Africa, we had 74 individuals in the executive under Jacob Zuma. We had ministries for everything, and we had deputy ministers and several deputy ministers in some instances. And essentially the way this was operating was for sites of patronage. And it was often intended in terms of also allowing some confusion to emerge where other things were happening. The real politic that perhaps is not often discussed in terms of the way we'd like rational decision-making to work in policy. And so by introducing a new ministry, I'm not sure that that's going to contribute to anything. We have already on the books institutions such as a food council that is supposed to be emulated at provincial and then at district level. None of those things exist. So if we were able to perhaps take some of those ideas and designs and really push a participatory process where there were non-state actors also involved, I think that would be a far more promising approach.
Okay, thank you for your perspective, Scott, that we don't really need a new ministry. Perhaps a different approach would work best. We are a minute past the time allocated for this session, but just in case there's, let me see if we have, we seem to have responded to all the questions. Yeah, that looks like we are done with all the questions that were here. Some of these are indicated as not, some of them are indicated as answered. I'm wondering, I thought some of these have also been responded to, but maybe that's fine. We could have extra conversations after this meeting, obviously. What remains for me is really to close this this session, and first of all to thank our 4 presenters. Thank you very much, Jode, from the Institute of Development Studies and World Vegetable Center, for availing yourself and also interact with the participants this afternoon and giving us insights of the work that you're doing, pulling together all kinds of papers to understand what's going on in terms of the political and economic dynamics of nutrition and health. And thank you so much to Kenny from Kenya, again, giving us a perspective of what's happening in Kenya with the decentralization process, whether this is having benefits in ANH or maybe not. Limbanazo, your touch on real-time ethics, the need for real-time ethics to be part of that is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for making that presentation and responding to the questions. And final, of course, we had Scott. You managed to pull several questions together and respond quickly to give us a perspective of what's happening in South Africa post-apartheid, that progress may not be what we thought it is. There's still teething issues right there in South Africa. Thank you very much. They have just posted that don't forget to visit the ANH2020 poster. Please look at the chat. The technical colleagues are posting several links there that you can click and move on. I trust that this has enriched each one of us. We were 32 at the peak. And thank you very much to everyone who attended. We'll see you in other sessions. Good afternoon and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks all.